The alarm did not blink. It screamed. I felt the floor tilt under my boots before I understood why. Sparks fell from a cracked panel above my head and landed on my shoulder, and I did not even brush them off. There was no time for small pain. Only the big kind mattered now. My name is Veyron Solis, and I was the last officer standing on a ship that was trying very hard to stop existing. 3 hours earlier, we had been a fleet, 12 ships, all carrying the mark of the Hollow Combine, all moving in formation toward a quiet patch of space where we hoped to hide and repair our wounds. Now there was one ship left, and it was mine, and it was falling apart around me one wall at a time. The enemy had come out of nowhere. No warning beacon, no signal, just a wall of fire that turned our formation into wreckage in under 4 minutes. I still do not know how they found us. I only know that when the smoke cleared, I was standing in a control room with 2 crew members instead of 40, and a ship that groaned like an old man trying to stand up after a long fall. "Captain Solis," said Oren, my last surviving engineer, "the Corps will not hold another jump." I looked at him. His face was pale, streaked with grease, and something darker that I chose not to examine too closely. "Then we do not jump," I said. "We fly low and slow, and we find somewhere to land before this ship decides to become a tomb." Oren nodded, but his eyes told me he did not believe we had anywhere to land. We were far from Combine territory, further than any patrol route, deep in a part of the galaxy our maps called empty. Our maps were wrong. It was Mira, our last navigator, who found it first. She was younger than me by many years, barely past her training, and her hands were shaking as she pulled up the readings. "There is a system 3 hours from here," she said. "One habitable world. Old data says it is undeveloped, pre-industrial. No defenses, no fleet, nothing that can threaten us." I almost laughed at the relief in her voice. A world with nothing that could threaten us sounded like exactly what we needed. A world that could not fight back was a world where we might finally stop running. "Set a course," I said, slow and quiet. "If that core fails, I want us coasting, not falling. 3 hours is a long time when your ship is dying under you." I spent it walking the corridors, checking on what little crew remained, listening to metal complain in ways metal should not complain. Twice I heard a deep groan from somewhere below decks that made my stomach drop, the sound of something structural giving up just a little more of itself. Oren worked the entire time without rest. I watched him wrap a damaged conduit with cable from a dead console, his fingers moving with a kind of desperate skill that comes only from knowing failure means death. He did not speak much. None of us did. There was nothing left to say that would help. Mira kept her eyes on the scanners, watching for any sign of pursuit. Twice, she flinched at shadows on the screen that turned out to be nothing, drifting rock and old debris, ghosts of a battle that had not happened here. I did not blame her for flinching. I flinched too, every time the ship groaned, every time a new light turned red on my console. When the planet finally came into view, it looked almost peaceful. Blue water, white clouds, green land stretched out beneath us, like something painted rather than real. For one foolish moment, I let myself believe we had found safety. Then the scanners woke up. "Captain," Mira said, and her voice had changed completely. "I am reading orbital structures, multiple satellites, active communication networks. There are ships up here, Captain. Many ships." My relief turned to ice in less than a second. "That is not possible," I said. "Our data says—" "Our data is old," she said. "Our data is wrong." Oren appeared in the doorway, his face white. "Captain, something is hailing us." I had faced enemy ships before. I had faced fire and silence and the cold calculations of war. I had never faced a moment quite like this one, where I did not know if the voice about to speak through my comm system belonged to a rescuer or an executioner. "Put it through," I said, because there was no other choice left to make. The voice that came through was calm in a way that startled me. Not cold like a machine, not sharp like a soldier, just calm, the way a person sounds when they have seen many strange things and are no longer surprised by one more. "Unidentified vessel, you are entering a populated system. Please confirm your status and intentions." I gripped the edge of my console. My hands were not steady, but my voice had to be. "This is Captain Veyron Solis, of a hollow combine vessel. "We are not a threat. Our ship is critically damaged. We require repair and assistance. We mean no harm to your people." There was a pause, a long one, long enough that I imagined a dozen different endings to this conversation, most of them bad. "Copy that, Captain Solace. This is Flight Controller Daniel Whitlock. Cut your engines to minimum and hold your current heading. We are sending escort vessels to guide you down. Do not attempt evasive maneuvers. Do you understand?" "I understand," I said, and I meant it more deeply than he could know. We had no fuel left for evasive maneuvers anyway. We had nothing left but the hope that whoever waited below would choose mercy over fear. Two ships rose to meet us. Sleek, fast, clearly built by people who understood flight far better than our old data had suggested. They flanked us on either side, not firing, not threatening, simply present, like guards walking beside a stranger through unfamiliar streets. "They are not hostile," Oren said quietly, watching the readouts. "Their weapons are not even active." I felt something loosen in my chest, just slightly. Not trust, not yet. But the absence of immediate death was its own kind of relief. As we descended through the clouds, I caught my first real look at the surface. Cities spread across the land in patterns I did not expect from a species our records called primitive. Lights traced rivers and coastlines. Vehicles moved along roads in organized lines. This was not a world of huts and spears. This was a world that had quietly grown into something far larger than anyone in the Combine had bothered to notice. Mira looked at me, and I could see the question in her eyes before she spoke it. "Captain, what is this place? Our records said nothing about this." "Our records are old," I said again, because it was the only honest answer I had. "We came here looking for the simplest possible solution to our problem. I do not think we found it." The ship shuddered hard as we entered the lower atmosphere, and for a moment every light on my console flared red at once. Oren grabbed the edge of his station to keep from falling. Mira gasped, her hands flying across her controls, trying to compensate for a sudden drop in altitude that should not have happened. "Core instability," Oren shouted. "We are losing power to the stabilizers." I do not remember deciding to grab the manual controls. I only remember my hands moving on instinct, fighting a ship that no longer wanted to fly, while two strangers from a forgotten world matched our path step for step, refusing to peel away even as we shook and dropped and threatened to become a fireball over land that was not ours. "Hold together," I whispered to the ship, though it could not hear me, though metal does not listen to pleading. "Just hold together a little longer." It did, barely. We leveled out at the last possible moment, skimming low over a wide stretch of open ground that our escorts seemed to be guiding us toward with practiced precision, as if this exact kind of emergency landing was something they had planned for in advance. The ground rushed up faster than I wanted. I braced myself, gripped the controls, and felt the impact travel through every bone in my body as we touched down hard, skidded, and finally came to rest in a cloud of dust and steam. For a moment, none of us moved. None of us spoke. The only sound was the slow tick of cooling metal and my own heartbeat pounding far too loud in my ears. Then the comm crackled to life again, the same calm voice from before, only now there was something else in it too, something that sounded almost like concern. "Captain Solace, this is Flight Controller Whitlock. We have you on the ground. Medical and recovery teams are en route. Please remain calm and stay inside your vessel until our teams arrive." I looked at Oren, then at Mira. Both of them looked back at me with the same expression, the same unspoken question that none of us dared to ask out loud. We had come here broken, hoping for the smallest possible help from a world we believed could offer nothing more. I did not yet know that this landing would change everything we thought we understood about strength, about war, and about the people we had almost dismissed as too simple to matter. I only knew that for the first time in 3 hours, the ship beneath my feet had finally stopped trying to kill us. And somewhere outside, in the dust and the rising steam, footsteps were approaching. I forced myself to stand. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else, someone who had not just spent 3 hours fighting to keep a dying ship in the air. Oren was already moving toward the hatch controls, though his hands trembled on the panel. "Captain, should we open it?" he asked. We do not know these people. We do not know anything about them. He was right, and I knew it. Every instinct I had built over years of service told me to stay sealed inside, to treat this landing as a hostile one until proven otherwise. But instincts built in Combine space were not built for this place. This world had already shown restraint when it could have shown force. 2 armed ships had escorted us down without firing a single shot, even as we shook and stumbled through the sky like an easy target. "Open it," I said. "If they wanted us dead, we would already be dead." The hatch hissed and groaned, metal complaining one final time before it slid aside. Warm air rushed in, carrying smells I did not recognize, growing things and burning fuel and something sweet underneath it all. After months of recycled ship air, it almost made me dizzy. A group of figures stood at a careful distance from our hull, watching us with expressions I could not yet read. They were dressed in simple uniforms, nothing like the heavy armor I expected from a world preparing for first contact with the unknown. A tall man stepped forward first, his hands open and visible, palms turned toward us, in a gesture that needed no translation. "I am Daniel Whitlock," he said, the same calm voice from the comm system now standing in front of me, made of flesh instead of static. "You are safe here. Nobody is going to hurt you." I studied his face for any sign of deception and found none that I could identify. Perhaps that meant nothing. Perhaps his people were simply better at hiding such things than mine. But something in the way he stood, steady and unhurried, made the tight coil in my chest loosen just slightly further. "Captain Veyron Solis," I said, stepping carefully down the ramp, my legs still uncertain beneath me. "This is Oren, my engineer, and Mira, my navigator. We are all that remains of our crew." Something shifted in Daniel's expression at that, something that looked almost like sorrow, though we were strangers to him and had no claim to his sympathy. "How many did you lose?" he asked quietly. The question caught me off guard. I had expected questions about our weapons, our origin, our intentions. I had not expected someone to ask about the dead so plainly, so soon. 37, I said, and the number felt heavier leaving my mouth than it had felt sitting silently in my chest for the last 3 hours. Daniel nodded slowly, and for a moment nobody spoke. Around us, more people arrived, some in uniforms like his, others carrying equipment I did not recognize, scanning devices and medical cases and tools that looked far more advanced than anything our outdated records had prepared me to expect. A woman with short dark hair approached next, introducing herself as Priya Hendricks, head of the recovery team assigned to our landing site. She moved with quick, efficient steps, already directing her people toward our damaged hull even as she spoke to me. "Captain, your ship is leaking something toxic from the lower hull," she said. "We need to get your crew clear immediately and begin containment. Is there anyone still aboard?" "No," I said. "We are the last 3. Everyone else did not survive the attack that crippled us." Priya's jaw tightened, but she did not slow down. "Then let us get you somewhere safe, and let my team handle the wreck. You 3 look like you have not slept in days." She was not wrong. I could not remember the last time I had closed my eyes for longer than a stolen minute between crises. Mira swayed slightly beside me, and Oren caught her arm before she could stumble, though his own legs did not look much steadier. We were led away from the smoking ship toward a row of waiting vehicles, and I found myself glancing back more than once, unable to fully release the instinct to protect what remained of our vessel, even though it had nearly killed us only moments ago. "It is hard to let go of something you fought so hard to save," Daniel said, walking beside me. "I do not know how to feel about a thing that almost killed us and also kept us alive," I said. The vehicle ride was quiet. Mira fell asleep within minutes, exhaustion finally overtaking the fear that had kept her alert for so long. Oren stared out at the passing landscape, watching strange buildings roll by with an expression caught somewhere between wonder and disbelief. I could not sleep. My mind kept replaying the attack, the silence afterward, 37 names I would carry for the rest of my life. "I am thinking that we came here for the simplest kind of help," I told Daniel. "Repairs, fuel, a safe place to grieve before we tried to find our way home. I did not expect a world this advanced. I did not expect kindness either, if I am honest. What did you expect? He asked. Spears, I admitted, or indifference, or fear that would turn into violence the moment we looked threatening. We have learned, over a long history, that fear and violence solve very little, he said. We also learned that the wrong assumption can cost everything. The vehicle slowed as we approached a large complex of buildings, bright with lights against the darkening sky. Guards stood at the perimeter, alert but not hostile. This is one of our medical and research centers, Daniel said. Your crew will be examined, treated, and given a place to rest. Nobody here intends you harm, Captain Solace, but I will not pretend you are not also here to be understood. My people are curious and careful in equal measure. I appreciated the honesty more than I expected to. After years of combine politics, where every word hid 3 other meanings, his plainness felt almost foreign in its own way. Understood, I said. We have nothing to hide. We have lost almost everything already. There is little fear left for us to protect. Daniel studied me for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted again, something thoughtful, almost calculating, though not unkindly so. We will see about that, he said quietly, more to himself than to me, and before I could ask what he meant, the vehicle came to a stop, and the doors opened onto a night full of unfamiliar light, unfamiliar voices, and a future none of us could yet imagine. The room they gave me had a window, and I stood at it for a long time before I let myself sit down. Outside, the lights of the human city stretched farther than I could measure, and somewhere beneath all that light, teams of engineers were already crawling through the broken bones of my ship. A woman named Lucy Bennett came to examine me within the hour. She introduced herself as a doctor, though her tools looked nothing like the medical scanners I knew. She moved with quiet confidence, asking simple questions in a calm voice while she worked, checking my pulse, my breathing, the strange bruises along my ribs that I had not even noticed forming during the crash. You have 3 fractured ribs, she said, and a concussion that should have put you flat on your back hours ago. I do not know how you were still flying that ship. There was nobody else to fly it, I said. She looked at me for a moment, something thoughtful crossing her face, and then continued her work without further comment. I appreciated that she did not press further. I had little strength left for explanations. When she finished, she gave me something to ease the pain, and within minutes, the sharp edges of my exhaustion softened into something heavier and slower. I drifted toward sleep faster than I expected, and somewhere in that drifting, I heard her speaking quietly to someone outside the door, though I could not make out the words. I woke to sunlight and the sound of voices in the hallway. For one disoriented moment, I forgot where I was, my body still braced for alarms and falling debris. Then memory returned, heavy and complete, and I sat up too quickly, regretting it immediately as pain flared across my ribs. Oren was already awake when I found him in the adjoining room, sitting at a table covered in diagrams that were not his own. A man I did not recognize sat across from him, sketching something with quick, practiced strokes, while Oren watched with an expression of fascinated disbelief. "Captain," Oren said, noticing me in the doorway, "this is Ethan Brooks. He is one of their senior engineers. He has been asking about our reactor design since before dawn." Ethan stood and offered his hand in a gesture I had learned, from old records, was meant as a sign of goodwill rather than challenge. I accepted it carefully. "Your engineer has been very patient with my questions," Ethan said. "Your reactor technology is unlike anything we have built. The compression method alone could change how we think about power generation for the next decade." "It nearly killed us several times over," I said. "Most powerful things tend to," Ethan replied, and there was no mockery in it, only honest agreement. We were brought to a larger room soon after, one with high ceilings and screens covering every wall, each one displaying images of my ship from different angles. Mira was already there, looking far more rested than the night before, standing beside a woman with reddish hair who was pointing at one of the screens with quiet intensity. "Captain Solace," the woman said, turning toward me, "I am Hannah Foster, lead of the technical assessment team. I want to be honest with you from the start, because I think you deserve that more than careful diplomacy." I braced myself. Honesty delivered with that kind of warning rarely carried good news. Your ship cannot be repaired the way you hoped, Hannah said. The core damage is too severe. If we tried simple patches, you would lose power again within days, likely somewhere far less forgiving than here. The words landed harder than I expected. I had clung, without fully admitting it to myself, to the hope that repairs meant returning to something close to what we had lost. Hearing that hope closed off so plainly felt like another small death added to a night already full of them. "Then what do you suggest?" I asked, keeping my voice level through effort alone. "A full rebuild," Hannah said, "not a patch. Not a temporary fix. We replace the failing systems entirely, using our own technology where it is stronger than yours, and preserve what is genuinely superior in your design. It would take time. It would also leave your ship fundamentally different than it was before." I looked between the three humans in that room, then at Oren and Mira, searching for some sign of hesitation, some hint that this offer carried hidden cost. I found none that I could identify, only the same calm professionalism I had seen since the moment we landed. "Why would you do this for us?" I asked. "We are strangers. We arrived with nothing to offer in return." Hannah exchanged a glance with Ethan before answering. "Because we have a problem of our own, Captain, and your arrival may be connected to it in ways neither of us fully understands yet." That caught my attention sharply. "What problem?" Hannah gestured to one of the screens, and the image shifted to show a section of debris pulled from the edge of our crashed ship's trail, fragments too small and scattered to have come from our own hull. "This wreckage was caught in your ship's wake when you entered our system," she said. "It does not match your vessel's structure. It matches something else, something we have been tracking for almost 2 years." My chest tightened. "Tracking how?" "Quietly," Ethan said. "Through long-range sensors positioned well beyond our usual range, we detected unusual movement patterns near the outer edge of our system 18 months ago. Ships that did not belong to us, observing rather than approaching, then vanishing for months at a time before returning. The Hollow Combine has no presence this far out," I said slowly, though even as I spoke the words, doubt crept into my own certainty. "We did not say it was the Hollow Combine," Hannah replied carefully. "We said it was something else, something your records may not even contain." A silence settled over the room, heavy with implications none of us were ready to name aloud. I thought of the ambush that destroyed our fleet, the impossible speed of the attack, the way our enemy had appeared from nowhere with no warning signal, no warning at all. "Show me everything you have," I said. What followed was hours of review, screens full of fragmented sensor data, energy signatures that matched almost nothing in our own database, patterns of movement too disciplined to be random. Mira worked alongside Hannah's team with growing focus, her earlier exhaustion replaced by the sharp attention of someone recognizing a puzzle that mattered. "This signature," Mira said at one point, pointing to a cluster of readings near the edge of the display. "This is close to what we recorded during the attack on our fleet. Not identical, but close enough that I do not believe it is coincidence." Hannah leaned forward, studying the comparison Mira had pulled up. "How close?" "Close enough that I would stake my life on it," Mira said quietly. "Whatever attacked us was already watching your system before we ever arrived here." The weight of that statement settled over the room like a physical thing. If Mira was right, our crash landing had not simply brought danger to this world by accident. It may have led an old and patient threat directly to a doorstep it had already been circling for nearly 2 years. "We need to speak with my full council," Hannah said finally, straightening. "Captain Solace, I would like you and your crew present for that conversation, if you are willing." "I am willing," I said immediately. There was no version of caution that made sense to me now, not with stakes this large balanced on information only we could provide. Oren caught my arm gently as we prepared to leave the room. "Captain," he said quietly, "if this enemy has been watching them for 2 years, why attack us first? Why not simply move against this world directly?" It was a fair question, and one I had no comfortable answer for. "Perhaps they were not ready," I said, "or perhaps they wanted to see how this world would respond to outsiders before deciding how dangerous it truly was." Oren's expression darkened at that. "Then our crash may have given them exactly the test they were waiting for." I had no reply that could soften that thought, and I did not try to manufacture one. We had come here broken, hoping only for the smallest mercy a quiet world might offer strangers in need. Instead, it seemed we had arrived carrying a war on our heels, one that may have already been creeping toward this world long before our engines ever failed. The council chamber, when we reached it, was smaller than I expected, a circular room with a long table and perhaps a dozen serious faces already gathered around it. Daniel was there, along with several others I had not yet met, men and women, whose posture suggested authority worn comfortably rather than displayed for effect. An older man at the head of the table introduced himself as Director Marcus Hale, and his eyes moved over the three of us, with careful, unhurried assessment before he spoke. "Captain Solace," he said, "Hannah tells me you may have information relevant to activity we have been monitoring along our outer boundary. I would like to hear it directly from you." I told them everything. The ambush, the 4 minutes it took to turn a fleet of 12 ships into wreckage, the silence afterward, broken only by alarms and the groaning of a dying hull. I told them about the 37 names I now carried, and the desperate gamble that brought us to a world we believed offered nothing but the simplest, smallest kind of help. When I finished, the room remained quiet for a long moment, each person absorbing the weight of what I had described. "This matches concerns we have held for some time," Marcus said finally. "We have observed patience in whatever has been watching us. Patience and discipline, neither of which we associate with random raiders or opportunistic threats. What we associate it with," Hannah added, "is preparation." A woman near the end of the table, introduced to me as Captain Olivia Marsh of their planetary defense fleet, leaned forward with sharp focus in her eyes. "Director, if this enemy has been observing us for 2 years and has now demonstrated the capability to destroy a fleet of 12 advanced vessels in under 4 minutes, I do not believe we have the luxury of treating this as a distant concern any longer." "Agreed," Marcus said. "Which raises the question I believe we must answer today. Captain Solace, your ship cannot be repaired in any meaningful sense. It must be rebuilt. I would like to know whether you would accept that rebuild on the condition that your vessel and your crew stand alongside us if this threat ever reaches our skies." The question hung in the air, simple in its wording and enormous in its implication. I thought of my crew, reduced from 40 to 3. I thought of the names I carried, and the home that no longer existed in any form I could return to with empty hands. I thought of a world that had shown us mercy when caution would have been the easier, safer choice. "Director Hale," I said, "we came here with nothing left to lose. If you are offering us a reason to fight again, rather than simply survive, I will not refuse it." Marcus studied me for a long moment, then nodded once, slow and deliberate. "Then let us begin," he said, "because I do not believe we have as much time as any of us would prefer." Outside the chamber windows, the sky remained calm and blue, utterly unaware of the patient threat that may already have been drifting somewhere beyond its edge, watching, waiting, and counting the days until its moment finally arrived. The work began before sunset. I had expected paperwork, formal agreements, the slow grinding wheels of bureaucracy that governed even simple decisions back in Combine space. Instead, within hours of leaving the council chamber, I found myself standing in a vast hangar where my broken ship had already been moved, surrounded by more engineers than I could easily count, each one studying a different section of the hull with quiet, focused urgency. Ethan met me near the entrance, a data slate in his hand, and an expression that mixed exhaustion with something close to excitement. "We have already begun mapping your reactor housing," he said. "Your engineer Oren has been invaluable. He understands systems most of my team has only theorized about." I found Oren near the ship's exposed core, deep in conversation with 3 other engineers, his hands moving through the air as he described some function I could not follow from a distance. He looked more alive than I had seen him since before the ambush, the haunted stillness of the past day replaced by something closer to purpose. "Captain," he said when he noticed me, "they want to replace the entire stabilization matrix. Their materials are lighter and stronger than anything we use. If this works, the ship will fly faster than it ever did before and survive damage that would have destroyed it completely under the old design." "And the reactor?" I asked. "Preserved," Ethan answered for him. Your compression method is too valuable to discard. We are reinforcing it instead, building protective layers around the core that should prevent the kind of failure you experienced during the attack. I walked the length of the hull slowly, watching teams work with a kind of disciplined energy that reminded me, uncomfortably, of preparations for war rather than simple repair. Sparks fell in controlled showers from welding tools. Panels were stripped away and replaced with materials that gleamed under the hangar lights, darker and somehow more solid than anything we had carried before. Mira found me there, watching the work in silence. She had changed out of her uniform into simpler clothes provided by the humans, and for a moment she looked less like a navigator and more like the young woman she might have been in some life that the war had never touched. "Captain," she said quietly, "do you think we are doing the right thing?" I considered the question carefully before answering. "I think we are doing the only thing left available to us," I said. "We lost our home already. We lost our crew. If this world is willing to give us a reason to stand again, I do not see wisdom in refusing it out of caution alone." "It feels strange," Mira admitted, "to owe so much to people who knew nothing about us yesterday." "It does," I agreed. "Strange, and also clarifying. They did not have to choose mercy when we landed. They chose it anyway. I find I trust that choice more than I trust most decisions made by careful calculation." Mira nodded slowly, though I could see the thought still settling uneasily in her mind. I did not push further. Trust, I had learned, was not something that could be argued into existence. It had to be earned, slowly, through actions repeated over time, and we had only begun that process hours ago. Later that night, Hannah found me standing alone, near the hangar entrance, watching the work continue under bright artificial light, long after the sun outside had set. "You should rest," she said. "Tomorrow will be long. I find it difficult to rest while watching strangers rebuild the only thing my crew has left," I admitted. Hannah considered that for a moment. "We are not rebuilding it as strangers, Captain. Not anymore. The moment we agreed to stand with you against whatever is coming, we stopped being separate concerns. Your ship is becoming something neither of us could have built alone. I think that matters more than either of us yet realizes." I looked at her carefully, searching for the careful diplomacy I had grown used to expecting from authority figures across my years of service. I found none, only plain conviction, stated simply, without performance. "Why do your people trust so quickly?" I asked. "We arrived broken and desperate. We could have been anything. Liars, scouts for a larger invasion. You had no way to know." "We did not trust quickly," Hannah said. "We trusted carefully, and then we acted decisively once that trust was earned. There is a difference, even if it looks similar from the outside." "And if we had been a threat?" Hannah's expression did not change, but something steady settled behind her eyes. "Then we would have been ready for that as well. We are not as simple a people as your old records apparently suggested, Captain Salas. We have learned to balance openness with preparation. It is, I think, the only way a species survives long enough to become worth attacking." Her words lingered with me long after she walked away, returning to whatever work still awaited her despite the late hour. I stood there for a long while longer, watching sparks fall like brief stars inside the hangar, watching strangers labor over the broken shell of everything my crew had left, and I found myself, for the first time since the ambush, allowing myself something close to hope. It was a fragile thing, that hope, thin and untested. But it was more than I had carried in 3 days, and I chose, that night, to hold on to it as carefully as I could, knowing that whatever waited for us beyond this world's quiet sky would test it soon enough. 3 days into the rebuild, the alarm sounded again, and this time it was not my ship dying. It was the entire base waking up at once. I was in the hangar when it happened, watching Oren direct a team through the final stages of reactor reinforcement, when every screen in the building shifted at the same moment to a single flashing alert. Engineers froze mid-task. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the low hum of machinery and the distant blare of a warning none of us yet understood. Hannah appeared at the hangar entrance moments later, moving fast, her usual calm replaced by something tighter and more urgent. "Captain Salas," she said, "Director Hale needs you in the command center immediately." All of you. We followed her through corridors filled with quickening footsteps, past rooms where technicians spoke in clipped, efficient bursts, until we reached a chamber far larger than the council room from days before, walls lined with screens showing data I did not yet understand but recognized, instantly, as deeply alarming. Marcus stood near the center of the room, his attention fixed on a screen displaying a slow-moving cluster of points far beyond the edge of the system. 3 hours ago, he said without preamble, noticing our arrival, long-range sensors detected a formation entering the outer boundary of our system. 11 vessels, configuration unknown, speed and movement pattern consistent with a controlled, deliberate approach rather than random transit. My chest tightened immediately. Show me their signatures. Hannah pulled up the comparison without hesitation, placing the new readings beside the fragments recovered from our crash site days earlier. The match was not subtle. It was close enough that even Marcus, unfamiliar with our technology, could see the resemblance plainly on the screen. This is them, Mira said quietly, studying the numbers with sharp focus. The same configuration that destroyed our fleet. 11 ships this time, not the full force, but enough. Enough for what? Captain Marsh asked, stepping closer to the display. I considered the question carefully, drawing on years of studying enemy patterns that had, until recently, belonged entirely to Combine intelligence reports rather than personal experience. 11 ships suggests a probing force, I said. Not an invasion, an assessment. They likely wish to measure your defenses before committing to anything larger. And if they find our defenses insufficient, Marcus asked, then they return with considerably more than 11 ships, I said, and considerably less patience. The room absorbed that answer in heavy silence. Around us, technicians continued working, voices low and urgent, screens shifting between different angles of the approaching formation as new data streamed in from sensors positioned far beyond the planet itself. How long until they reach the inner system? Hannah asked one of the technicians. At current speed, approximately 60 hours, came the reply. 60 hours. I ran the number through my mind, weighing it against everything I knew about the rebuild still underway in the hangar below us. My ship was stronger than it had been, but far from finished. The reinforced core was stable, the new stabilization matrix installed, but critical weapon systems remained only partially integrated, caught somewhere between the old design and whatever new capability the humans had begun building into the frame. Ethan, I said, turning to find him near the back of the room, what is the true status of my ship? He hesitated, and that hesitation told me more than words would have. Flight capable, he said finally. Weapons systems are perhaps 60% integrated. We were planning another 4 days for full completion. We do not have 4 days, I said. No, he agreed quietly. We do not. Marcus turned to address the room more broadly, his voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to making difficult decisions under pressure. Then we accelerate everything. Captain Marsh, I want our full defensive fleet ready for deployment within 48 hours. Hannah, your team works around the clock on the Combine vessel until either it is finished or the enemy arrives, whichever comes first. Understood, Hannah said immediately, already turning toward the door. I caught her arm gently before she could leave. There is something else you should know, I said, something I did not mention in council, because I was not certain it mattered until now. She paused, giving me her full attention, despite the urgency pressing on every other thought in the room. The enemy that attacked my fleet does not simply destroy what it encounters, I said. It studies first. The 4 minutes that ended my fleet were preceded by nearly an hour of silent observation, sensors probing our formation before the attack ever began. If this pattern holds, these 11 ships may already be gathering information about your defenses long before they reach visual range. Hannah's expression sharpened. Then they may already know more about us than we know about them. It is likely, I admitted. She absorbed that for a moment, then nodded sharply. Then we make sure that whatever they learn does not include the true extent of what we are building. Captain Solis, I need you and your crew in the assessment room. If we are going to face this enemy with your ship as part of our defense, I need to understand exactly what we are dealing with, down to the smallest detail you can provide. What followed was hours that blurred together into a single continuous effort. I sat with Hannah's team, recounting every detail I could remember about the ambush, the enemy's movement patterns, the precise sequence of events that had turned 12 ships into wreckage in under 4 minutes. Mira contributed sensor data recovered from our own ship's final logs, fragments of information that, combined with human analysis, began forming a clearer picture than either side could have built alone. Their weapons cycle on a delay, Mira said at one point, highlighting a section of the data. After each major strike, there is a brief period, perhaps 11 seconds, where their primary systems appear to draw power away from a fence and towards something else. Shields, possibly, or propulsion. Hannah leaned forward sharply. 11 seconds is enough time for a coordinated counterstrike, if we know exactly when to expect it. It is enough time, I agreed, if our ships can communicate fast enough to act on it together, rather than independently. A man named Caleb Ortiz, one of the human strategists assigned to the assessment team, spoke up from across the table. Our fleet already operates on a shared tactical network. If we can confirm this pattern holds consistently, we could synchronize a strike during that exact window. It needs to be tested, I said carefully, confirmed beyond a single data point before we stake lives on it. We may not have time to confirm anything before they arrive, Caleb said. Then we confirm it the moment they do arrive, Hannah said, using the smallest possible engagement to verify the pattern before committing our full fleet to the assumption. It was a dangerous plan, built on a single observation and a narrow window of opportunity, but I found myself unable to suggest a better alternative. War rarely offered the luxury of certainty. It offered only the choice between acting on the best available information or waiting until the moment for action had already passed. By the second day, exhaustion had settled over the entire base like a physical weight. I caught brief stretches of sleep between sessions, waking each time to fresh updates on the enemy formation's steady approach. Oren barely left the hangar, sustained by something that looked less like food and more like sheer determination, as his team raced to complete the weapons integration before time ran out entirely. I found him there during one of my rare breaks, standing beneath the half-finished frame of what had once been simply my ship and was quickly becoming something else entirely, something neither fully combined nor fully human, but built from the best of both. "How close?" I asked. "Close," Oren said, not looking up from the panel in front of him. "The primary weapons array is integrated. The secondary systems still need calibration, but they will function, even if not perfectly." "Will it fly?" He finally looked at me, and despite the exhaustion etched into every line of his face, something steady remained in his eyes. "Captain, this ship will fly faster and hit harder than anything we ever built alone. Whether that is enough against 11 of them, I cannot promise, but it will not fail us the way the old design did." I rested a hand briefly on the cool metal of the hull, feeling the quiet hum of systems coming back to life after days of careful, exhausting labor. It no longer felt entirely like the ship that had carried us here, broken and desperate. It felt like something new, born from grief and mercy in equal measure, and I found myself hoping it carried enough of both to see us through what was coming. The enemy did not wait for the final night. 20 hours before their projected arrival at the inner system, 3 of the 11 ships broke formation and accelerated ahead of the main group, moving with a speed that sent every screen in the command center flashing red at once. Marcus called for me immediately, and I arrived to find the room already thick with tension, voices overlapping as technicians tried to track the sudden change. 3 vessels detached from the main formation, Captain Marsh reported, her eyes fixed on the display. Current trajectory suggests they intend to reach the outer patrol line within the hour. "A probe," I said immediately. "Exactly as I warned. They want to test your response before the larger force arrives." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Captain Marsh, scramble the outer patrol squadron. Minimal engagement only. I want eyes on their capability, not a full confrontation." "Director, with respect," Marsh said, "minimal engagement against an unknown enemy is a difficult thing to guarantee once shots are fired." "I am aware," Marcus said. "Do it anyway. We need information more than we need to avoid risk tonight." I felt a familiar cold weight settle in my chest, the particular dread of watching a decision made from necessity, rather than certainty. I had made such decisions myself, more than once, and I had buried crew members afterward whose deaths traced back to exactly that kind of calculated risk. "I want to fly with the patrol squadron," I said. Every head in the room turned toward me. Hannah spoke first. "Captain, your ship is not fully calibrated." Oren himself said the secondary systems remain unfinished. "The primary weapons array is functional," I said, "and I know this enemy's patterns better than anyone in this room. If there is a chance to confirm Mira's theory about their weapons cycle, I want to be there to see it firsthand, not reading about it secondhand on a screen afterward." Marcus studied me for a long moment, weighing the request against the obvious risk it carried. "Captain Marsh," he said finally, "make room in the patrol formation for Captain Solis's vessel. Keep them on the flank, not the point." "Understood," Marsh said, though her expression made clear she did not entirely welcome the addition. I found Oren and Mira already waiting near the hangar by the time I arrived, both of them having heard the news through channels faster than any official announcement could travel. "You are not leaving us behind for this," Mira said before I could speak, her voice carrying a firmness that had grown steadily since the night we first landed. "The ship needs a full crew to fly safely," I admitted. I was not planning to leave either of you behind. The flight out felt different from anything we had experienced since the crash. The ship responded beneath my hands with a sharpness it had never possessed before, the new stabilization matrix translating my smallest adjustments into immediate, precise movement. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to believe Oren's promise that this vessel would not fail us the way the old design once had. We joined the human patrol squadron at the edge of the system, 12 sleek vessels arranged in careful formation, our modified ship taking position along the flank exactly as ordered. Ahead of us, 3 enemy points grew steadily larger on every screen, their approach unhurried, almost contemptuous in its patience. "Confirmed visual range in 90 seconds, Mira reported, her voice tight with focus. "All squadrons hold position." Marsh's voice came through the shared channel, steady despite the tension I could hear threading beneath it. "We observe first. We do not fire unless fired upon." The weight stretched unbearably as the enemy ships closed the final distance, their hulls finally resolving into shapes I recognized instantly, the same sharp, angular design that had carved through my fleet in 4 merciless minutes. Old fear rose in my chest, familiar and unwelcome, and I forced it down through sheer effort of will. Then, without warning, one of the enemy ships opened fire. It was not the overwhelming wall of destruction I remembered from the ambush, but a single targeted strike aimed directly at the lead human vessel. Shields flared bright against the impact, holding, but only barely. "Return fire," Marsh ordered immediately. "Confirm the 11-second window." Every ship in the squadron opened up at once, and I watched the enemy vessel's shields ripple under the combined assault, watched its weapons systems flicker and dim exactly as Mira had predicted, drawing power away in that brief, critical gap. "Now," Mira shouted. "Strike now, while the window holds." I poured everything our partially finished weapons array could offer into that single moment, and beside us, the human squadron did the same, concentrated fire converging on the vulnerable enemy vessel before its systems could recover. The ship staggered, then broke apart in a silent flash of light, debris scattering outward into the dark. The remaining 2 enemy vessels retreated immediately, accelerating back toward the main formation without attempting further engagement, their purpose for this probe apparently satisfied. Silence followed, heavy and disbelieving, before Marsh's voice broke through the comm channel again. "Confirmed kill. All squadrons report status." One by one, ships checked in, damaged but intact, no casualties reported. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding, my hands finally steady on the controls for the first time since the ambush that started this entire ordeal. "The window holds," I said quietly into the comm, more to myself than anyone listening. Mira was right. "Confirmed," came Marsh's reply, something close to relief audible beneath her professional tone. "Good work, Captain Solis. All squadrons, return to base. I believe we now know exactly how we are going to fight tomorrow." As we turned back toward the surface, I watched the 2 retreating enemy ships shrink into the distance, carrying word of tonight's engagement back to a force that would arrive within the day, fully aware of what we could do, and undoubtedly prepared to adjust for it. We had won a single battle in a war that had not yet truly begun, and somewhere in that victory, I felt the fragile hope from days before harden into something closer to determination. On the final night before the enemy's projected arrival, Marcus called one last gathering in the command center, every key figure from both crews present, screens behind him showing the enemy formation now close enough to register individual ship signatures rather than a single distant cluster. "Tomorrow, we will know whether everything we have built these past days is enough," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the quiet room. "I will not pretend the odds are simple. 11 of their ships against our full defensive fleet, with one heavily modified vessel from outside our own history standing among us. But I have learned, over the years, that the size of a force matters less than the resolve carrying it forward." He turned toward me directly, and the room's attention followed his gaze. "Captain Solace, 3 days ago, your ship was wreckage drifting toward our world with nothing left to offer but desperation. Tonight, it stands ready to fly beside ours into whatever comes next. I do not know what tomorrow holds, but I know that whatever battle we face, we do not face it as strangers any longer." I looked around the room at faces both human and not, exhaustion etched into every one of them, resolve burning steadily beneath that exhaustion all the same. Somewhere beyond the calm night sky outside, 11 ships carried an old and patient threat closer with every passing hour, a threat that had once shattered my fleet in 4 merciless minutes. I did not know, standing there, whether tomorrow would end in victory or in another set of names I would carry for the rest of whatever life remained to me. I knew only that we would not face it broken, and we would not face it alone, and for the first time since the ambush that started all of this, I found that knowledge was enough to steady the trembling that had lived quietly beneath my ribs since the moment our engines first failed. Tomorrow would tell the rest. The main enemy formation arrived 4 hours ahead of schedule. I learned this while still standing in the hangar, watching Oren make final adjustments to the secondary weapons calibration, when every alarm across the base erupted at once, sharper and more urgent than anything I had heard since the night we first landed. "They accelerated," Hannah said, arriving at a run, her composure finally cracking under the weight of compressed time. Whatever they learned from the skirmish last night, it convinced them to move faster, not slower. "How long until they reach orbit?" I asked. 6 hours, she said, maybe less. 6 hours to finish a rebuild that had already been pushed to its absolute limit. I looked at Oren, and he met my gaze with the particular calm of someone who had already accepted that perfect would not be possible, only good enough. "The secondary array will function at partial capacity," he said. "I cannot promise more than that in 6 hours. Partial capacity is more than we had 3 days ago," I said. "Finish what you can. I will gather the rest of the crew." The base transformed around me within minutes, calm preparation giving way to something far more urgent. Vehicles moved between buildings at speeds that suggested necessity rather than caution. Voices carried across open spaces, calling names, relaying orders, organizing a defense that had, until this moment, existed mostly in careful planning rather than immediate reality. I found Mira already in the command center, working alongside Caleb Ortiz to refine the tactical models built from last night's engagement. Her face was pale but focused, the particular sharpness of someone channeling fear into useful effort rather than allowing it to spread unchecked. "The 11-second window held during the skirmish," she said as I approached. "But Captain, I do not believe it will hold against their full formation. They will have adjusted by now. They will have seen what we did and corrected for it." "Likely," I agreed. "What else do we have?" Caleb pulled up a new display, showing the full enemy formation now resolving clearly on long-range sensors, 11 ships moving in a configuration tighter and more deliberate than the loose probing pattern from before. "They are flying in a defensive cluster," he said. "Mutual shield support, almost certainly. If one ship's shields begin to fail, the formation likely redistributes power to compensate before we can capitalize on any single weakness." "Then we do not target a single weakness," I said, studying the formation carefully. "We force them to choose between protecting the cluster and protecting themselves individually. Split their attention, and the redistribution you describe becomes a liability rather than a strength. How? Mira asked. I considered the problem, drawing on tactics I had studied during years of combine service, strategies built for situations where overwhelming force was not an option, only careful misdirection. If we send a portion of our fleet in an aggressive approach toward one flank of their formation, while holding the remainder back, their natural instinct will be to consolidate shields toward the visible threat. That consolidation creates gaps elsewhere in the formation. Gaps we then exploit with the hidden portion of our fleet, Caleb said slowly, understanding building in his expression. It could work. It would require precise timing, though. If the diversion force moves too aggressively, we risk losing ships meant only to draw attention rather than win the engagement outright. Then we make certain those ships understand their purpose clearly, I said, and we ensure my vessel takes that role, since it carries weapons systems they have not yet seen in their adjusted calculations. Hannah, who had been listening from across the room, stepped forward with obvious concern. Captain, your ship operates at partial weapons capacity. Volunteering it for the most exposed position in this strategy carries enormous risk. It carries risk regardless of where I position it, I said. I would rather that risk serve a clear purpose than simply exist as a precaution. Captain Marsh studied the formation display for a long moment, her arms crossed, clearly working through the plan from every angle a defender might attack it. There is a flaw, she said finally. If the diversion force draws their attention too effectively, the enemy may simply commit additional ships to destroy it outright. Rather than splitting attention as we hope, we would be sacrificing 4 vessels to save the rest, not drawing a temporary opening. The room fell quiet at that, the blunt truth of it settling uncomfortably among everyone present. She is right to raise it, I said. The plan only works if the diversion force can withdraw the moment the gap appears, rather than remaining exposed waiting for the main fleet to act. Then we tighten the timing, Mira said, already pulling up new calculations. If Caleb's team can guarantee the main fleet strikes within 90 seconds of the gap forming, the diversion force only needs to survive that window, not the entire engagement. 90 seconds is tight, Caleb admitted, but achievable if Marsh's squadron holds position close enough to respond immediately rather than approaching from a distance. Then that is what we do, Marcus said, cutting through the remaining hesitation in the room. Marsh, position your fleet accordingly. I want no more than 90 seconds between the gap forming and your strike landing. Captain Solace, your diversion force withdraws the instant that strike begins, regardless of what opportunity may tempt you to remain longer. Understood, I said, though privately I wondered whether discipline would hold quite so cleanly once the chaos of actual battle replaced the calm certainty of planning. Hannah caught my eye briefly, something unspoken passing between us, an acknowledgement that plans built in quiet rooms rarely survived contact with the violence they were meant to contain. Neither of us said it aloud. There was no use adding doubt to a plan that already carried more risk than comfort allowed. The 5 hours that followed blurred together into a continuous rush of preparation. Oren finished what calibration he could on the secondary weapons array, working alongside Ethan until both men looked equally exhausted, equally determined. Mira refined the tactical timing with Caleb, running simulation after simulation until the numbers settled into something resembling confidence rather than hope. I spent what time I could afford walking among the human pilots who would fly alongside us. Faces I had only briefly met, now bearing the particular stillness of people preparing to risk everything for a cause that, 3 days ago, had not yet included strangers from beyond their own sky. A young pilot named Lucas Bryant approached me near the final hour, his uniform crisp despite the chaos surrounding us, his expression carrying a kind of nervous determination I recognized from countless young officers throughout my own years of service. "Captain Solace," he said, "I wanted to ask you something, if you have a moment." "Of course," I said. "Do you believe this plan will work?" he asked. And beneath the question, I heard the real one underneath, the one every soldier eventually asks before a battle whose outcome remains uncertain. I considered offering empty reassurance, the kind of confident lie that experienced commanders sometimes use to steady frightened troops. Instead, I chose honesty, the same honesty Hannah and her people had offered me since the moment we landed. "I believe it gives us the best chance available, with the time and resources we have," I said. "I cannot promise more than that. War rarely allows certainty, only the choice between acting on the best information available or waiting until acting is no longer an option at all." Lucas nodded slowly, something settling in his expression that looked less like fear and more like quiet acceptance. "That is more honest than most answers I expected," he said. "It is the only kind of answer I find useful," I said, "especially before a battle." Daniel found me shortly after, standing near the hangar entrance with 2 cups of something warm that smelled faintly of bitter roasted grain. He offered one to me without comment, and I accepted it, grateful for the small gesture amid the surrounding chaos. "You did not have to volunteer for the most dangerous position in this plan," he said. "Someone needed to," I said. "My ship carries weapons they have not yet adjusted for. It made sense for it to draw their attention."
"That is the tactical answer,"
Daniel said. "I am asking for the true one." I considered deflecting, falling back on the practiced calm that years of command had taught me to wear like armor. Something in his plain, patient honesty made deflection feel dishonest in return. "My crew is 3 people where it should be 40, I said finally. "I do not know how to carry that weight quietly anymore. If I am going to risk what remains of us, I would rather risk it doing something that matters, rather than waiting safely behind a line while others bear the cost instead." Daniel was quiet for a moment, turning his cup slowly in his hands. "We lost people too, building toward this moment, long before you ever arrived," he said. "Quiet losses, patrol ships that vanished near our outer boundary over the past 2 years, never explained, never recovered. I think part of why my people moved so quickly to help you is that we recognized something familiar in your grief. We have been carrying our own version of it for longer than you might expect." The admission settled over me with unexpected weight, reshaping something in how I understood the mercy this world had extended since the night we crashed. It had not been simple kindness offered freely to strangers. It had been recognition, 2 grieving peoples finding, in each other, a reason to finally stand against a shared and patient threat. "Thank you," I said quietly, "for telling me that." "Thank you for trusting us enough to ask," he said, and there was nothing more to say after that, only the shared silence of 2 people from entirely different worlds, bound together now by loss neither of them had chosen. As the final hour approached, I returned to my ship one last time, finding Oren and Mira already aboard, both of them settling into positions that had, over the past days, become familiar in ways I had not expected so soon after losing everything we once knew. "Ready?" I asked, taking my own seat at the controls. "As ready as 6 hours of frantic work allows," Oren said, though there was no complaint in his voice, only the steady determination that had carried him through every crisis since the ambush first tore our fleet apart. "Then let us see whether this ship remembers how to fight," I said, and felt the engines respond beneath my hands with a power that, 3 days earlier, I would not have believed possible. We lifted off alongside 3 human vessels, climbing through the same sky we had crashed through only days before, now carrying not desperation but purpose, not wreckage but something rebuilt from grief and mercy into a weapon neither species could have created alone. Below us, the hangar and the base shrank into a cluster of lights against the dark land, and somewhere within that cluster, I knew Hannah and Ethan and Daniel stood watching screens, waiting to learn whether the strategy they had helped build would hold against an enemy that had already proven, once before, how quickly careful plans could collapse into chaos. I found myself hoping, quietly, that whatever happened in the hours ahead, it would not cost this world the same price it had already cost mine. Ahead of us, beyond the curve of the planet, 11 enemy ships continued their steady, patient approach, unaware that the world they intended to test had already learned more about them than they likely suspected, and had spent every available hour since preparing a response, built not from fear, but from the fierce, unexpected alliance between a broken crew and a world that had chosen kindness when caution would have been easier. The battle that would decide far more than either side yet understood was about to begin, and for the first time since watching my fleet burn, I found myself approaching it not with dread, but with something close to readiness. Behind us, Marsh's voice came through the comm channel, steady and clear. All ships, hold formation until the signal. Captain Solace, your diversion force moves first. May whatever you believe in watch over all of us today. Acknowledged, I said, and guided my ship forward into the dark. Mira's steady breathing beside me, and Oren's focused silence behind. 3 survivors of a shattered fleet, now flying toward a battle that would determine whether mercy shown to strangers could, in the end, become the very thing that saved the world offering it. The enemy formation filled my forward display within minutes, 11 ships moving in tight, disciplined unity, their hulls catching distant starlight in sharp, angular reflections that I remembered too clearly from the night my fleet died. Diversion force, hold your approach vector, Marsh's voice came through the comm, steady despite the tension I could hear beneath it. Main fleet is in position, waiting on your move. Acknowledged, I said, gripping the controls with hands that, despite everything, remained steady. Beside me, Mira monitored the enemy formation with fierce concentration, while behind us, Oren kept watch over systems that had been rebuilt in 6 desperate hours rather than the careful days they deserved. They have noticed us, Mira said, 3 ships breaking from the main cluster to intercept. This was the moment the entire strategy depended on, the instant where careful planning either survived contact with reality or shattered beneath it. I pushed the ship forward, angling toward the flank exactly as designed, drawing the attention of 3 enemy vessels away from the main formation's tight, mutually supporting cluster. Diversion force engaging, I reported. 3 enemy ships responding as predicted. The 3 human vessels flying alongside us spread into a loose formation, weapons fire beginning to arc across the gap between our ships and the approaching enemy. I felt the first impact against our shields moments later, a jarring shudder that ran through the entire frame, though the reinforced hull held without complaint. Shields at 94%, Oren reported from behind me. Holding well. I returned fire, watching our weapons array, still operating at partial capacity, strike against the lead enemy vessel's shields with less force than I would have preferred, but enough to draw its full attention toward us, rather than the larger fleet waiting silently beyond visual range. Gap forming in their main formation, Mira said, her voice rising with controlled excitement. The cluster is redistributing shield power toward our engagement, exactly as predicted. Marsh, this is Solace, I said into the comm, fighting to keep my voice level despite the ship rocking under another impact. Gap confirmed. Your window is open. Copy that. Marsh's voice replied immediately. Main fleet engaging. Diversion force, prepare to withdraw on my mark. The next 90 seconds stretched into something that felt simultaneously instant and endless. I watched our shields drop steadily under continued fire, watched Oren's expression tighten with each new alert flashing across his console, watched the 3 enemy ships pressing harder, clearly sensing an opportunity even as their attention remained fixed entirely on us rather than the larger threat now bearing down on their exposed formation. Shields at 61%, Oren reported, tension sharpening every word. We cannot sustain this much longer. Hold, I said, watching the timer Mira had set ticking down toward Marsh's promised window. Just a little longer. Then the human fleet struck. I watched it happen across our secondary display, dozens of coordinated strikes converging on the exposed gap in the enemy formation, exactly as Mira's calculations had predicted. Shields that had redistributed toward our diversion, now critically thin where the larger fleet attacked. 2 enemy vessels broke apart almost immediately under the concentrated assault, debris scattering bright against the dark. Mark, Marsh's voice came through sharply. Diversion force, withdraw now. I pulled the ship back hard, breaking away from the 3 enemy vessels that had been pressing our shields toward collapse, the sudden retreat catching them off guard just long enough for us to put critical distance between ourselves and their weapons range. But war, I had learned long before this night, rarely followed plans cleanly to their conclusion. Captain, Mira said suddenly, alarm sharp in her voice, one of the 3 ships pursuing us is not falling back toward the main formation. It is continuing pursuit. I checked the display and saw she was right. a single enemy vessel breaking from its companions, accelerating directly toward us with a speed that suggested either desperation or fury, neither of which boded well for what came next. "Evasive pattern," I ordered, banking the ship hard as the pursuing vessel opened fire, a strike that missed by a margin far too narrow for comfort. "Shields at 43%, Oren reported. "Captain, we cannot absorb many more hits like that." I weighed our options rapidly, aware that the main battle continued raging behind us, aware that Marsh's fleet needed every available moment to press their advantage, rather than diverting resources to rescue a diversion force that had completed its purpose. We were, in this moment, alone against a single determined enemy, and the responsibility for what happened next rested entirely on decisions I needed to make in the space of seconds, rather than careful deliberation. "Mira, can you predict its firing pattern the way you predicted the larger fleet's weapon cycle?" I asked. She studied the readings rapidly, fingers moving across her console with practiced urgency. "It is firing in bursts of 3, then a brief recovery period, similar to the pattern we observed before, though compressed." "How long is the recovery period?" "Perhaps 6 seconds, she said, "less than before. They have adjusted, just as you warned they might." 6 seconds was thin, but it was something, and something was considerably better than nothing in a moment where our shields continued bleeding away under sustained pressure. I waited through another exchange of fire, feeling the ship shudder under a glancing impact, watching our shields drop further with each passing second. "Burst incoming," Mira warned. 3, 2, 1. The enemy fired. 3 rapid strikes that I dodged through sharp, instinctive maneuvering, feeling the ship respond beneath my hands with the precision Oren had promised it would carry into battle. The moment the final shot passed, I turned us hard back toward the pursuing vessel, rather than continuing to flee. "Captain, what are you doing?" Oren asked, alarm clear in his voice. "Ending this before it ends us," I said, pushing every remaining scrap of power into our weapons array and firing directly into the enemy ship's recovery window, the 6-second gap where its systems remained vulnerable, exactly as Mira had calculated. Our strike landed solid against weakened shields, and for one suspended moment I feared it would not be enough. Then the enemy vessel's shields collapsed entirely, our follow-up fire tearing through unprotected hull, and the ship broke apart in a silent burst of light that left only drifting debris where a moment before there had been a determined, deadly threat. Silence followed, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing and the quiet hum of systems struggling to stabilize after the strain we had placed on them. "Confirmed kill," Mira said quietly, disbelief threading through the words. "Captain, we did it." "The main battle is not finished," I said, turning the ship back toward the larger engagement still unfolding in the distance. "Status report." What we found, returning to the main battlefield, was a scene already tilting decisively in favor of the human fleet. The gap Marsh's squadron had exploited had proven devastating. 4 enemy ships destroyed in the opening strike, the remaining vessels scattered and struggling to reform their broken formation under continued pressure from a fleet that no longer hesitated, no longer held back caution in favor of decisive, coordinated aggression. I guided our ship back into the fight, adding our remaining weapons capacity to the effort, watching as one by one, the enemy formation that had once destroyed 12 of my own ships in 4 merciless minutes began to crumble under a defense built from days of desperate cooperation between 2 species who, a week earlier, had been complete strangers to one another. The celebration in my chest proved premature. "Captain, incoming transmission," Mira said suddenly, her voice tightening with new alarm. "It is not from the enemy fleet. It is from one of our own ships. Marsh's flagship is taking heavy damage." I switched channels immediately, catching the tail end of a frantic exchange, voices overlapping with the particular chaos of a crew fighting to keep their vessel intact under concentrated fire. 2 enemy ships, apparently regrouping rather than scattering as expected, had turned their combined attention on Marsh's lead vessel, exploiting a moment when her squadron's formation had briefly thinned during the earlier strike. "Marsh, this is Solus," I said. "What is your status?" "Shields failing," came her reply, strained but steady. "We can hold a few minutes, no longer. I need every available ship redirected to this position." I looked at the tactical display, calculating distance and time with the same urgent precision that had carried us through every decision since the ambush first tore my old life apart. We were close enough to reach her position, but doing so meant abandoning our current engagement, leaving a gap in our own line that the remaining enemy ships might exploit in turn. Oren, can our weapons handle sustained fire if we commit to this? I asked. For a few minutes, he said. After that, I cannot promise anything beyond hope. A few minutes would have to be enough. Mira, plot the fastest intercept course. Marsh, hold on. We are coming. We broke from our position and accelerated hard, weaving between scattered debris and ongoing exchanges of fire, every second stretching with unbearable tension as we closed the distance toward Marsh's failing vessel. I could see it clearly now on visual display, hull scarred and smoking, shields flickering weakly under continued assault from the two enemy ships pressing their advantage without mercy. Engaging, I said, opening fire the moment we entered range, drawing the attention of both enemy vessels away from Marsh's crippled ship and onto ourselves instead. It worked, though not without cost. Both enemy ships redirected immediately, their combined fire tearing into our already weakened shields with brutal efficiency. Oren shouted something I could not fully process over the sound of alarms flooding the cabin, our hull shuddering under impacts that felt, for one terrifying moment, exactly like the final minutes of the ambush that destroyed my original fleet. Shields at 22%, he reported, voice tight with barely controlled urgency. Captain, we cannot sustain another hit of that magnitude. Marsh, your shields, status, I called out, fighting to hold our ship steady under continued fire. Recovering, came her strained reply. Give us 30 more seconds. 30 seconds felt like an impossible distance to cross, while our own shields bled away beneath sustained enemy fire. I banked hard, pulling our ship through a tight evasive pattern that Mira called out in rapid, precise bursts, her voice the only steady thing in a cabin filled with shaking metal and flashing warnings. There, she said suddenly, pointing toward a brief gap in the enemy fire pattern. Now, Captain, return fire now. I poured what remained of our weapons capacity into that narrow opening, watching one enemy vessel's shields buckle and fail under the concentrated strike. It was not enough to destroy the ship outright, but enough to force it into a defensive retreat, breaking the combined assault that had been grinding down both our vessels simultaneously. The remaining enemy ship hesitated, apparently recalculating the engagement now that its companion had withdrawn, and in that hesitation, Marsh's recovered shields finally held long enough for her own weapons to land a decisive strike. The final attacker broke apart in a burst of light, leaving only drifting wreckage where moments before there had been a coordinated, dangerous assault. Confirmed kill, Marsh said, relief audible beneath the exhaustion in her voice. Solace, thank you. We would not have held those final seconds without your support. We are not finished yet, I said, watching the tactical display shift as the scattered remnants of the enemy formation began their final, disorganized retreat toward the system's edge. All ships, hold fire, let it go. Captain Marsh, I said, surprised by the order. That ship will report this engagement back to whatever force sent it. I am aware, Marsh replied, but we are not interested in becoming the kind of enemy that destroys what flees. Let them carry word of what happened here today. Let them understand exactly what kind of resistance they will face if they return. I considered her reasoning carefully, finding in it the same quiet conviction I had encountered throughout every interaction with this world, since the night we crashed, broken and desperate, into a sky we had once dismissed as belonging to something too simple to matter. Understood, I said, and watched the final enemy vessel vanish into the dark, carrying with it whatever lesson this world had chosen to teach, rather than simply destroy. We returned to the surface in the gray light of early morning, the battle finally over, the base below, alive with a mixture of exhausted relief and quiet, disbelieving celebration. I brought the ship down carefully, feeling for the first time since the crash that started this entire journey, that the vessel beneath me had finally proven itself worthy of everything sacrificed to rebuild it. Hannah was waiting when we emerged from the hatch, her expression carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who had spent the entire battle watching screens rather than fighting directly, a different kind of strain than what Mira, Oren, and I carried, but no less real for its difference. "You did it," she said simply. "We did it," I corrected. "This was never something my crew could have managed alone, and I do not believe it was something your fleet could have managed without us either. This belonged to both of us, equally, from the moment your people chose to help strangers who arrived with nothing left to offer." Daniel approached as well, along with Marcus and Captain Marsh, the four of them forming a small gathering around us, as the base continued its slow transition from wartime urgency back towards something resembling ordinary life. "Captain Solace," Marcus said, "I believe this marks the beginning of something neither of our peoples fully anticipated when your ship first entered our system. I would like to discuss what comes next, once everyone has had proper rest." "What comes next?" I asked. "An alliance," Marcus said simply, "built on what we accomplished together today, and on the shared threat that I suspect has not been fully eliminated by this single battle, however decisive it proved to be." I looked around at the faces surrounding me, human and otherwise, exhausted and victorious in equal measure, and thought of the 37 names I still carried, the home I could no longer return to, the desperate gamble that had brought us here seeking nothing more than the smallest possible mercy from a world we had wrongly believed offered little of value. We had come here for simple repairs, expecting little beyond fuel and welds enough to limp toward whatever uncertain future remained for the scattered remnants of the Hollow Combine. Instead, this world had rebuilt not just our ship, but the purpose we believed we had lost entirely in the fire that destroyed our fleet. They had armed us, stood beside us, and helped us win a war that had, until days ago, seemed destined to end in nothing more than quiet, anonymous defeat, somewhere far from anyone who might remember our names. "I would welcome that discussion," I said, "once we have all had the rest we have earned." Marcus nodded, something like genuine warmth finally breaking through the careful authority he had carried since our first meeting. "Then rest well, Captain Solace. You and your crew have earned every hour of it, and considerably more besides." As the gathering dispersed and the base slowly settled into the quiet aftermath of victory, I stood alone for a long moment beside the ship that had carried us through fire, through grief, and finally through a battle that had tested everything we believed about strength, mercy, and the strange, unexpected alliances that could rise from the wreckage of disaster. We had approached this world broken, seeking only the smallest repairs a desperate crew could hope for. Instead, we had found something far larger waiting beneath that simple request, a partnership forged in shared loss, and proven, beyond doubt, in shared victory. Whatever threat still waited beyond the quiet edge of this world's sky, I found myself, for the first time since the ambush that started this entire journey, genuinely unafraid to face it, knowing that whatever came next, we would not face it as strangers, and we would not face it alone.